Dear students, we were discussing with Chapter 1, Sensations and Responses. Today we shall discuss on the topics Reflex Actions, Autonomous Nervous System and some disorders associated with nervous system. So first let us discuss about Reflex Actions. So what do you mean by Reflex Actions? The accidental or involuntary responses towards stimuli is termed as reflex actions. Reflex actions does not occur consciously. Now let us see some examples of reflex actions.
Blinking of eyes or shaking of head when insects come in contact. Sudden withdrawing of leg when thorn pierces into skin. Closing of eyes when a bright light hits our eyes. Sudden withdrawing of hands when touch something hot.
Now we understood what is a reflex action. But do you know how does this reflex action happens in our body? Let us find out. Now look at illustration 1.9 which was given in your textbook. There you can see an example of a reflex action. So the same picture is given here. What type of reflex action is this? Yes, sudden withdrawing of hand while touching something hot or while touching the candle flame. So here first the finger is going to touch the candle flame and suddenly withdraws the hand. So how it happens? Here at the fingertip there are certain specialized cells called receptors, which you have already studied in the beginning of this chapter about receptors. What are called receptors? Receptors are specialized cells present in our sense organs and other parts of body that receives stimulus. So here the receptors in our fingertip. Fingertip means receptors present in our skin. Skin is a sense organ. So the receptors of our skin receives the stimuli. Here the stimuli is candle flame or heat. So the receptors receives the stimuli and it generates an impulse. Then the impulse generated by the receptor is carried by the sensory neuron. So the sensory neuron carries the impulse to the spinal cord. When the sensory impulse reaches the spinal cord, here you can see an interneuron. This interneuron receives the sensory impulses and it generates a sudden response. This interneuron receives the sensory impulses and it generates a sudden response. Then this response is carried by the motor neuron. Here you can see this is the motor neuron. Motor neuron carries this information to the related muscle. So now the muscle got information. Muscle got information to withdraw the hand so that the muscle contracts and we will suddenly withdraw our hand. So actually the reflex action is a very sudden action which happens within seconds. Now let us learn about reflex arc. So what do you mean by reflex arc? The pathway of impulses in a reflex action is termed as reflex arc. So now here you can see a reflex arc. Of course there should be a stimulus. Then the receptors receives the stimuli and generates impulses. So let us see the pathway of impulse. From receptors the impulse is transmitted through sensory neuron and from sensory neuron it gets transmitted through interneuron. Then from interneuron it transmits through motor neuron and finally it reaches affecting muscles or related muscles. So this pathway of impulses is termed as reflex arc. And we know that mainly spinal cord is the center of reflex actions. So such type of reflex actions are termed as spinal reflexes. Spinal reflexes. But we can't say that spinal cord is the center for all reflex actions. For example, blinking of our eyes, when suddenly light falls on our eyes, we will blink our eyes, or something or some object came towards our eyes, we will blink our eyes. And this reflex action, it is a type of reflex action. This reflex action is controlled by cerebrum. So such type of reflex actions are termed as cerebral reflexes. So there are two types of reflexes, spinal reflexes and cerebral reflexes.
Why it is saying that don't drink and drive? It is because alcohol accelerates the action of gamma aminobutyric acid. It is a neurotransmitter. Higher doses of neurotransmitters weakens the reflex action and prevents making proper decision at proper time.
Now let us learn about autonomous nervous system. So children, if I ask you to list out some instances that make you frightened or fear in your life, what all things will you list out? Yes, for example, if you saw a snake suddenly while you are walking, you will get frightened or fear. Then one another example, while you are walking through road, if a branch of tree suddenly falls just in front of you, you will get frightened. Is that right? Yes. And one another example, a very familiar example for you. While going to write exams, if you are not much prepared for that exam, you will be having fear, isn't it? Then what all changes happens during these situations? What all changes happens in our body in these situations? Yes. What all changes? Our heartbeat increases, we will sweat or we will shiver, then our pupil dilates, then sometimes the production of saliva decreases and our throat will become dry. All these changes happens. But do you know how these changes are happening? But after some time, when we get frightened, after some time we'll go back to our normal condition. Do you know which part of our body makes all these changes? Yes, our autonomous nervous system makes all these changes in our body when we get frightened, and the autonomous nervous system itself take back us to the normal condition after some time. So the autonomous nervous system consists of two other systems, sympathetic system and parasympathetic system. So the sympathetic part of the autonomous nervous system makes all those changes in our body when we get frightened. What all changes? We know that increasing of heartbeat, increasing of breathing rate, sweating, shivering, etc. So the sympathetic system makes all these changes. But the parasympathetic system or the parasympathetic part of the autonomous nervous system returns us back to the normal condition after some time.
Now let us learn about nervous system and its disorders. Alzheimer's, it is the loss of memory. Parkinson's, it is the loss of body balance. Then epilepsy, it is due to continuous muscular contraction.